Chabanya skida in alay shrat span fi Rudmund didahan awakt.net API review. How'd I do, Tarek?
Good enough.
So, yeah. We still have a leftover red issue from Tuesday, and I think everyone here was involved in discussing that, so we should be able to finish it off. And is it like literally the only thing I didn't click? Oh no, I just went to the end.
Yeah. So basically, I'm trying to address the open issues here, and also we have a small delta change on the proposal. Yeah. If you go up a little bit more. Yeah, here. Yeah, this is so. Basically, we are requesting some small change here about introducing what we call it meter options, which is can encapsulate all parameters that can be used while creating the meter. The reason for that is it will give us flexibility in the future if we need to add more stuff there. Without really like creating a new constructors or breaking the interface that we are going to have. So basically, the meter options is encapsulating the parameters that it get passed to the meter constructor, which is like name, version, tags, and the scope. One note before we continue here is like in last approval last Thursday, we used the word context. To pass whatever the meter factory to the meter. So first change here is like we are changing the name from context to scope. And the reason for that is context have some meaning in the diagnostics space. Like it can mean like trace context or something like this, which can be confusing. So we are renaming just the name of context to scope here. From what approved before. And now we have, like if we have meter options, so in meter constructor, we had in the proposal, the first line is the meter constructor here, which is taking the name, version, and the tags and the scope, which stays the same. No change here, but we are proposing to have an extra constructor, which will take the meter options. So right now we will have like extra two constructors. And we are changing the iMeter factory create. Instead of taking like the individual parameters, it will just take the meter options. This is give us the flexibility to extend whatever path to create the meter. And also we are avoiding the default parameters, as Jeremy was pointing last time. So this is addressing this issue too. And last, we are going to have extension method, which is, we will call it also create, which is you can use it as giving the individual parameters, and it can create you a meter from it. So internally inside this extension method, we will create just the meter option and or whatever, and we can create the meter from it. So basically about like this proposal is just like adding the capability to be able to extend whatever parameters we can create the meter with, and also addressing the default parameters that Jeremy Barton had concern about it last time. And we are changing the word context to scope.
So from my perspective, that all looks fine. I'm just, and I'd be fine just signing off on it. One question on the extension method. It doesn't actually say, in terms of like raw typing, it doesn't save you a whole lot, right? You can say, you call create new open bracket name equals blah, version equals blah. And so there's not a whole lot of typing saved. And if the future, the whole purpose of meter options is to be able to add more things in the future, and if we do, that extension method quickly becomes defunct. I'm just curious if we really need it or not. I'm fine with it, but I question its reason to exist.
Yeah. So the only, I mean, the benefit for this extension method is this extension method is on the iMeter factory itself. So users who are using meter factory, I mean, they don't have like manual. Yeah, I understand your point about like they don't have manually to create the meter options and pass it to it. Yeah, it's just like you can think about it like synthetic sugar or something. Maybe not saving a lot in the typing, but yeah,
like the extension method's the one we want, right? Like it's basically the original proposal. We wanted default values, and we couldn't put it on an interface or a virtual method.
Right, but if you use target type new, the call into this one of just specifying a name would be new open paren with the way it's currently written, open paren, close paren, open curly, name colon. Is that what goes there? An equal? I don't know. Some punctuation. Your value. Close curly, close paren. And so it'd save you like 10 characters to call the overload.
I mean, it saves you a lot.
One thing
the name
to point out is if the name is required, should that be a get only property with a constructor that requires it?
Not with options, because they're activated. So they'll start out invalid, and then you'll configure them through DI, and then they will become valid by the time you resolve the meter. So like the meter constructor will have to validate and like throw an argument exception if name is. Oh, it's non-nullable too. Okay, well that one's kind of, I don't understand that part. But in options in general, you can't like require like people call it constructor. You need an empty constructor.
I think I agree with Jeremy about like the meter options should have the constructor, which is taking exactly like the same parameters that meter constructor is taking. I mean, like the name and the optional stuff after that.
Wait.
So this isn't following the options pattern.
I understood you until you said optional stuff.
What I mean is like we will have a constructor on meter options, which is taking name and taking version tags scopes as optional parameter.
Wait, why? Why do you need that? Now there's 3 different ways to do the same thing.
Well, we're working on discussing if we can get rid of this one by pushing another thing in front.
Could we just do required init on name? Or this is standard,
the name
right?
is required, but the others are optionals. The version tags scope are optionals.
And this needs to support net standards, so we can't do. Can we do required init?
No.
Right.
Not unless you want to force people to use an unsupported version of C#.
No.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
So a few things. One, it is weird that name is non-nullable.
Name is required, so it should be.
But with no constructor on meter options, you literally immediately have the wrong nullability annotation on name. You say new meter options, open and close paren, and the name is wrong.
It could default to the empty string instead of null.
Is that valid?
I hope
I
it's
feel
an,
like I'd rather it be null.
I hope it's an invalid name.
Yeah.
No, we don't. Okay, the name is invalid only if it is not. Any other values for name is valid.
So the non-null empty string is a valid name?
Yes.
Okay.
But would we want people like accidentally using empty string as a name because they just like newed up options?
Right. If it was invalid, I was saying with the current shape, you could have in the definition equal string.empty, and then you wouldn't have an invalid nullable annotation, but you would still start off in a not valid state that you have to change. But if it's a legal string, then that doesn't work.
I don't know. It feels to me, and maybe I'm off base, but it feels to me like the whole purpose of meter options is just to have basically a state bag of stuff. And
Right.
the validation of all of that happens in create. At which point, just
Right.
you make everything nullable, everything's settable, and there's no constructors other than the default parameter of this one. And you populate it with the data that you want to populate it, and you pass it into create. And if things aren't set up correctly, you get exceptions.
Yeah, and like while this isn't using the options pattern and will not be in DI, people should at least be familiar with it.
What would it take to make it follow? What would it take to make it follow the options pattern stuff?
It would have to be different, right? So the options pattern doesn't work well for like when there are a bunch of instances, right? Because typically options are like a singleton in DI. You can do named options, which then gets closer to this, but then like specifying things like version and tags and scope wouldn't work, right? So this is different, just a different scenario.
I see. The other I think valid thing would be you make name get only, or even if you want to set, that's fine too, but you give a constructor to meter options that only takes name, and all the optional stuff is then settable as properties. The same thing we do with attributes, right? The required stuff is all constructor, and everything else is a settable property.
I think this is reasonable to me.
All right, so I guess one question is, so this is being listed as going into meter, so this is part of system diagnostics metrics, the meter options?
Yeah, it will be in the system diagnostics, yes. Yeah, it will be with the meter. Yeah.
And then just to continue my thought, again, I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other about meter factory extensions.create. If we think that name version tags and scope are like 99% chance they're the only things we'll ever have, and we're only creating meter options as a safety net, then I think meter factory extensions.create is a fine thing to have. It's representing the most common thing with, the thing with a single API. But if we're creating meter options more because we actually expect we're going to be adding more stuff, then I worry that this extensions create method is going to quickly get inundated.
Yeah, I mean, I assume it would be the usual extra optional parameters pattern of this gets EB nevered and removes all its defaults, and then a later one gets the defaults. That's what that's what I assumed they were going with the pattern here.
Yeah.
Is that the thinking, that this would basically become obsolete as soon as there are additional things that are in meter options?
No, why we think it will become obsolete?
That you would be adding a new create method that included the extra parameters.
Right.
So
But it will not be.
I didn't literally mean obsolete. Yeah. I meant like
defunct.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we added another method, create method in the future, I mean extension method create, it will not have this optional parameters, but it will have extra parameter in addition to those parameters, I believe.
Yeah, but then you can only use that one if you're going to supply all of the existing things plus the new optional one. You could no longer have name and tags but not version.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that's I go back to yes, we could augment this with additional ones, but we better be darn sure that this is the 99% case. And if it is, great. Otherwise, you can say new meter options name open brace version comma scope comma whatever, and it's not a whole lot more.
So today, I mean, like many people can create the meter without supplying the other stuff like version. Of course, I mean, they don't have tags today, so they don't supply that. So most of the time they just supplying name. So if we, yeah, if we need them to work with iMeter Factory and doing the similar things that they are doing today, so this extension method will be preferable to have. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So
I'll leave it up to you, Ed.
yeah, just
Just pointing out that it's in the fullness of time. I want to make sure it feels good.
so just
Thank you.
you know, doodling.
Mhm.
So what would if we added a future thing,
Mm-hmm.
then what would happen here is this one gets nevered. We remove these defaults because you can't have multiple ambiguous defaults. I'll just make paint for myself. And then what it shows in IntelliSense just looks like there's still one create method and it just gained an extra optional parameter when you move to the new package version or TFM or whatever. Like, is this pattern you're already being concerned with it here, Steve, or
I'm thinking.
because this is just the optional parameters extension technique? It's not a
We've
pattern
done
because
this
it's
a
about
lot.
evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
you
just-
remove the defaults and then add the defaults to the biggest overload.
Because the
Right.
previous one needs to exist because that's what IL is calling because it doesn't understand defaults.
Right.
But then you make the longer one continue all of the defaults forward and then gain whatever new default parameters you want.
But this means that anytime we add anything to meter options, we will add a new create method.
It depends on like if it is really is going to be used a lot or not. I mean, like if something that we will say like not many people is going to use it, so no, we will not add the create method, but we will force them to use the meter options at that time manually.
All right. I mean, it sounds like we think this is the vast majority case, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Steve of it feels a little redundant, but not enough to fight.
I think when you're just specifying name, which at least in the code I've seen so far seems to be common, like it's a lot, even with target type new, to be like new open bracket name equals blah instead of just blah. So another thing that came up, so I assume, even though it's not here, is that meter and meter options are in, stay in, diagnostics and factory and extensions go in Microsoft extensions.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so...
And then,
oh, go ahead, Steph.
oh yeah, the one thing that like Levi and I spoke to Tarek about entirely too long after the last meeting is what happens if someone disposes one of these meters that were created by the factory. And like it sounds like it's like really subtle and not bad. Like if you, or sorry, really subtle and kind of bad, in that if you pull the meter it still works, but any listeners will be unsubscribed, which is like nothing will be thrown or anything. It just
Wait,
like silently stops working as well.
If I call iMeter factory.create,
Yeah,
I'm not supposed to dispose the return meter.
correct. So we were talking about calling it get instead, and I think people are still going to dispose it, and we should think about that. But yeah, we should also consider what we call it.
What?
So we prefer
Why?
to.
Remind me why?
Okay. Steven?
Can you hear us, Steve?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you got through a Y and then dropped and then came back and said Y again, so just making sure you were there.
I said remind me why.
I think I highlighted it, but go ahead, Tarek.
I'm not sure about the. I mean, like, Stephen Halter is the one who proposed like to change it. I mean, but I'm not.
I can discuss it, like why. Sorry, I was just trying to give you time. And it's Stefan for what it's worth, so it should maybe help a little bit with Steven also on the call. But like it's a cache, right? Like in the normal case for performance reasons. and Dispose like doesn't know who's calling it. Like it's the factory's responsibility to call it, which I mean, at that point, should we call it a cache and should we call it get? And
Okay,
yeah, so
so
like the meter itself doesn't know who calls Dispose, so it basically unsubscribes listeners if someone calls Dispose.
yeah, we looked at like the logger factory, which is doing the cache and still, I mean, like calling its own method like create logger or something, which is still going create, which is doesn't suggest also is caching or something like this. So we are trying to stick with the same pattern as the logger factory, which is like we will keep the create, not call it like get or create, and in same time about like for disposing stuff, we will clarify in the documentation about like the meter factory is the one who owning the lifetime of the meters that created inside the factory, and nobody should dispose the meters created from this factory. And also, if we look today, I mean, like users don't dispose the meters at all. I mean, so today, I mean, people just like do new meter, stick it in some like static, and it stay on the life cycle of the whole process. So I'm not concerned about this disposing, and we are going to clarify this in the documentation.
How does the meter factory know
concerned.
that meters aren't still being used? That it handed out?
Yeah, it will have a cache. I mean, inside it to have a
No.
cache for all.
No,
So
but
it could be a shared instance,
You call
like a
meter
logger.
factory.dispose, and I'm still using a meter that I got from create. How does that work?
It calls Dispose.
It doesn't, right? Like the subscribers get unsubscribed when they shouldn't. Like I do have a problem with this. Like iLogger is not iDisposable, meter is. Like I don't mind create as the API name. Like I like the consistency, but like we need to do the work, which is apparently made harder because these are now in separate assemblies. That if the factory owns the lifetime of these meters and it's going to be handing out the same instances to a bunch of like callers in parallel, like the Dispose should know how. Like even if we called it something else, even if we documented it, like I think people are going to call Dispose.
Why do you
And
think
it's
the
subtle.
people is going to call it dispose? I'm not getting
Because
it.
it's
it's
disposable.
disposable.
Exactly. Like it doesn't even matter how well it's documented, or if we called it like cache.get. Like some people are going to call Dispose, and it will be a bug. And like
Yeah, because people turn on CA 2000 and CA 2020 or whatever those rules are that say you have a disposable thing that just went out of scope, call dispose on it.
Yeah, but the meter factory is going to call dispose on it, not them. I mean,
No, I'm saying the analyzers tell people you have something that that is disposable that you need to dispose.
so I think we should find a way that when created by a factory, whether it's determined by whether you use the scope or we do some internals visible to, or we somehow put these in the same assembly. Like I think given the lifetime of this, like Dispose should know up. Or at the very least, it should make the meter like completely unusable in a way that it's like throwing ODs all over the place. So, because like subtly unsubscribing listeners when this happens, it's someone's gonna pull their hair out over this in the future if we do it that way.
So it's your meter's not sealed,
What
But-
does meter.dispose do?
but it also didn't implement disposable correctly, so you can't fix it.
What does meter.dispose do?
it just okay. So meter actually is creating the instruments, and it cache all instruments that created inside the meter. So dispose is just like marking as this meter with some flag is called disposed, and in same time it will free all instruments that get created inside it. This is what dispose does.
Right, because I was going to say you could return a derived type of meter that intercepts dispose and does nothing, and then has secret real dispose that you make the factory cascade into. That still won't solve the problem that disposing the factory might confuse somebody who thought they were still using the meter, because just the lifetime of this all gets very, very weird. But I don't know why we missed that meter was not sealed but didn't do disposing correctly.
Levi pointed the same thing out after the meeting ended Tuesday about the derived type and the lack. You would be proud. The lack of the proper dispose pattern, causing this to be more of an issue.
Proper dispose pattern aside, we could still make dispose virtual.
We could. Is that a breaking change?
No.
Because we were talking about it. Like, can the compiler remove like call vert in some cases if it recognizes?
It does in very rare. There's an open issue I think in Roslyn around this, but basically, it used to be that it would always do call vert, and now if you do ? Dot, it might just do a call if the thing that you're calling is not virtual, because the reason for the call vert was like a built-in null check. And so as part of the coalescing operator, if you do ? Dot, is, oh, I know this isn't null, so I don't need the call vert for the null check, so I can just do a call. So that syntax in an existing binary would end up calling the base instead of the override.
I mean, this could also be fixed to do the basic dispose pattern, because you can introduce protected void dispose bool that it has a body. It's not abstract, so it's not a breaking change to add the protected.
That's true.
virtual.
We could do that.
For all those people who want to derive from meter and have native handles without safe handle, they're going to appreciate it.
But to Jeremy's point, I like the thing that iMeterFactory.create hands back could be something derived from meter, who overrides dispose to be a no-op and has I only know how to call this internal dispose for real that it calls when it shuts down, that cleans up everything.
Oh yeah, I followed that and I love that. I just don't love the dispose pattern. Like, I like just making it virtual. But that's another fight. If we're gonna change it, we should change it to follow the patterns we've agreed on.
It also, if you assume that everyone will dispose, then it also does address the knowing when everyone has cleaned up, because you can ref count.
You could, but I wouldn't assume that, because like people using the factory won't, and like I agree with Sarah that like most people today won't.
But then you could just not clean up.
Yeah, that's what you would do. And then, like you said, you'd have the internal, like, this is the real dispose thing.
No, I mean, disposing the factory would not clean up until the ref count hit 0. And so if people hadn't called dispose, then they would just never clean up.
So I see.
So you would make the ref counting meter derived type dispose down refs and not give it a finalizer. And so if you don't using it, it never gets cleaned up?
Or you give it a finalizer, and if it gets finalized, then that's the sure indication that no one's still using it.
Like, as all meters right now, like, grows infinitely if you create these things and don't dispose them. But like to Tarek's point today, most people just, like, I guess, create them for the lifetime of the process once.
I assume we don't care particularly about how expensive it is to create a meter.
No. Yes, but it's explicitly required about, like, we need to avoid creating meters a lot. I mean, because like the patterns that I think we got a request for is like many people about, like, they try to create the same meter it was every request. I mean, like, it's coming instead of just like creating the meter and caching it.
Is creating a meter actually more expensive than looking in your cache? Like, you have a lot of data.
Sorry, I actually meant constructing a meter object, like new meter.
Yeah.
We don't care about the cost of that, right? I understand we care about the cost of iMeterFactory.create.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, we could play tricks, like meter could have, do the same thing that timer does, where it's got a strong reference to something that has a weak reference, or the other a weak reference, whatever it is. We could basically have something finalizable when someone drops the reference to meter. That we could have a finalizable object that basically says, all right, this was the last reference to this thing, so now I'm going to be able to clean this one up, and take it away from the meter factory.dispose, or tie it also in with dispose on the meter and have a ref count, and if it hits 0 as well, then it can also clean up, or something along those lines.
I mean, I like giving the factory full control and having dispose no op when returned from the factory.
The reason I'm pushing on this as well, Stefan, is like we have a HTTP client factory today, and we still tell you must dispose the HTTP client that it returns to you. Right? Always dispose your HTTP clients. So now we have a meter factory, and we say, but wait, don't dispose these things that are disposable. Right. It feels very inconsistent within extensions itself.
And I don't mind the logger factory analogy in saying, hey, you don't have to dispose it if it weren't iDisposable. Like,
it is true, if it weren't iDisposable, you wouldn't have to dispose it.
But like, I mean, you get the point. Like, I mean, it's definitely not out of place to have a factory that, he has a create method and you don't have to dispose the thing. But, the thing is disposable, and that really does make a difference.
Okay, so if we, I mean, every meter created from the factory, we subclass it to another object of meter, and if somebody calling dispose, not the factory one, we can make it no op, so it will not get disposed, but the factory will clean up when it need to do that.
I like that personally. I think that's
right. So if you create a meter from the factory, so now you have a factory meter, and you dispose the factory, but the meter has created instruments and you're still instrumenting. Does disposing the factory shut down the meter, or does the meter understand it's still in use and doesn't dispose itself? This goes back to is there ref counting, or is there lifetime management? Sorry, lifetime assignment.
I think I understand the question and what Tarek's proposing, and the answer is lifetime management. Like, the factory will dispose everything. Anyone using the meters, like, they'll be in the zombie state, because that's just how the meters are.
Use of the meters at that point just becomes no ops, or does something else?
I would suggest here about to make. I mean, I can track the dispose stuff as a separate issue from this design. And we can address this in different discussion, because
that's okay, except the only reason I'm pushing on it here is if you wanted disposal of the meter to if you want disposal of the factory, well, actually this doesn't matter. We just have to decide to make meter, decide what we want to do with the base class.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, so really it's, of all of this, are we still happy with the name create?
I'm still, preferring to keep create. I mean, the whole point, as I mentioned, was like, I want to keep parity with whatever logger factory.
I'm fine with create as long as we don't then give the guidance, don't call dispose.
Right.
We say, sir, go ahead and call dispose, and it'll just no op.
Yep, that's my preference as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, we can consider that. I mean, but I would prefer just like delay deciding about the exact way that we are going to handle the dispose here.
That's fine, but it speaks to the name, because if you create something, you clean the thing up.
Right.
Okay, create suggests, to me at least, and I think in other places where we've used it, create suggests you have ownership of the thing that is created.
Yep.
Exactly. I mean, would we just approve the virtualizing of meter.dispose while doing this?
I think so, and then Tara comes back and if there's any problems with it.
Yeah, making Dispose virtual. I mean, I'm not seeing any problem with that from now.
Right.
But if we need to delay it until we figure out the whole Dispose story, I mean, I'm fine too.
I think that means adding.
I don't think we should delay it.
Adding the protected dispose instead of making the disposable dispose be virtual.
I think the protected dispose is fine.
Which is like technically less breaking if someone ever called question mark dot, meter question mark dot dispose apparently, right? So we have that as well.
Okay.
Okay, and then why on meter do we need both constructors?
That's a good question, but yeah, if somebody just want to pass like name, version, tags, and that's it. But
because if they just want name and version, that's already there. If they want name, version, and tags, now they get to say new meter options, and that seems fine to me. But I don't use these APIs, so maybe you would disagree.
Yeah, I mean like my preference here is like if I'm creating a meter and I want to pass tags to it, I will just use the constructor instead of like looking at meter options and doing it. So the flat constructor will be better for me.
So the next time we add something else to meter options, we also add a constructor to meter and we add a new create method on meter factory extensions.
As I mentioned before about like if it depends on like what we're adding. I mean like if we're adding something that we think that many people is going to use it, yeah, maybe we can do that. But if it is not that, I mean like something like few people are going to use it, so I would say no.
Right, but for something where you think someone's going to use it, we're adding it in 3 different places. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right, because the extension method then basically becomes a object initializer for the object to then pack it down into the funneled call, which then unpacks it back into the constructor that looked like the create that you called in the first place. Yes.
Yeah, but remember about like, yeah, I mean, the extension method is just on meter factory, is not on the meter itself. So think about it like people using meter directly without the factory and people using the factory without like not initializing the meter themselves. So it's 2 scenarios here.
I don't have a strong opinion. If we think it's really common, it's fine.
Misalignment.
I bristle at the idea of having something that allows us that's fully extensible and then also having to add that thing in a bunch of other places for different style of consumption. But it's fine. If you think it's good, let's do it.
Okay, so adding on.
One last note, Jeremy, about like I mentioned down there, instrument recorder has instrument property, which is in the approval before on Thursday, it was not nullable, but I want to make sure that this is nullable.
Yeah, I think I got that. So we're gonna just scroll through the whole thing. So on instrument and all its derived types, we're adding so we have the new tags property and the tags
Right.
constructors for the chaining all the way down. Meter options, which has a name as a required parameter. It's
Yeah.
get only. It's not nullable. And then we have some
Good.
nullable optional stuffs.
Excellent.
Meter.
Sorry, one question on that. We don't actually need name to not be settable. Is that? But it's fine for it can be because we have it in the constructor. But if you make it settable, we could allow someone to change it multiple times. Do we care? Settable, not settable?
I don't see why not make it settable.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, I'm fine to have it settable, but I mean, like, we want to make sure that the behavior of set is exactly the same as the behavior of the constructor. I mean, if
Yeah.
the constructor will throw, so set will throw. Yeah.
The constructor would probably just call the setter.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, put the validation in the choke point. Okay, I just, went with Steve
Yeah,
had suggested following the attribute pattern.
Sorry, yeah, I was using it as an analogy, but
Yep.
I again, don't care. Just wanted to raise in case, Tarek, you care.
Okay. Right, so meter options, name is still get set, still non-nullable, comes from, it is a mandatory constructor parameter. Scope is the word it should be now. I got that change right? Yes, scope is the word it should be now. Meter, we're adding two constructors.
Yeah, one question here. I'm not sure about if we can prefer that or it will be confusing. In the first constructor, we will have name, version, tags, and the scope is optional. Is it possible we can change this to like name, tags, and version will be optional?
No, because you already have a string constructor, and that would violate our overloading guidelines.
Okay. Sounds fine. Okay.
I mean,
okay, go ahead.
If we really want to make a stink of it, we could. But our general answer is they only get longer. We don't insert parameters in the middle.
Yeah, I was just thinking about users which like really care about the name and passing tags, but they don't care about the version.
Well, they can use the meter options approach.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so we're adding on meters, tags, scopes, virtual dispose, and then all of these creates are overloads that are just taking tags now where they used to not before. Instrument recorder, I renamed this parameter to scope filter. And otherwise we left it as we discussed last time. Oh, sorry, and added the nullable annotation. And then in extensions, we have the factory, which only takes a meter options now. We still have the service extensions to go do the default registration, and then we have meter factory extensions that we discussed to death. Did I get everything?
Yeah, looks
Did
good.
we add the dispose to meter? Sorry if I just missed it. Like we talked about the new constructors, but we're talking about adding the virtual protector. Oh, okay, yeah, missed it.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Boop. Shukran Tarek. Alright. Did anybody put any other red things in the middle? Okay. Consider changing the return types of new throw helpers. 86341.
I'm happy to talk about this. Do we have quorum at this point for this kind of thing?
We still at 4?
Yeah.
I gotta see faces again. I lost the window. Yeah. Unless you think Emo's gonna have a lot of opinions and we want him specifically.
I kind of.
I was just gonna say I think this is one where at least Steven and I have both expressed that this isn't our favorite pattern, and it's kind of being brought because there's been community requests, and it might be good for this one to have more quorum. That way people with other opinions can also express whether they strongly feel whether this is appropriate or not.
Fair enough. Well, not fully talking about the topic, is that you prefer them all to be void, or you prefer them all to be not void?
I prefer them all to be void.
Me too.
Yeah, and I also prefer them to be void. There's been some scenarios where I've needed throw helpers that are not void returning, like switch patterns.
Mm-hmm.
But that's potentially something where we should push on the language to solve that problem instead. So
and
there's just
and to that point, there are discussions in the language happening about allowing switch expressions to have expression blocks, or whatever they're called, statement expressions. Yeah.
I am personally pro returning the input. However, I don't like that it would be inconsistent with the things that we already shipped, and it's not super strong. It doesn't come up a ton.
All right.
I think we should wait.
For the Json one, or for the...
Oh, no, for the previous one that you've apparently already moved off of.
Yeah.
So good job.
Yeah. I was just trying to interpret... I thought I interpreted Tanner's comment of how you and he had both expressed your opinion, but there was a chance I missed which thing was this when it was being stated, so I just was curious. All right. Add a JSON type info resolver dot with modifier extension method. Let's see if we can. I was gonna say, let's see if we can do this without summoning people. What does JSON type info resolver look like now? Yes, that's exactly what I meant. Currently looks like combine. Yeah, I mean, it seems reasonable. The with pattern is something already introduced, or with is the thing already introduced by C#, and having a method called with modifier that adds a modifier where modifier is a word we already have sounds reasonable to me. I'm just bad at browsing today. Modifiers is action of JSON type info. This is action JSON type info. I guess, yeah, so I guess an interesting question is, should it be with modifier or add modifier?
Is it replacing, or is it actually adding?
Well, he says with and takes a single action, and modifiers is a list.
I see.
And I feel like with suggests replacement, because to me with and set are the same, I could be wrong.
Was it returning a new instant? What was the return type of the thing?
In type, so it takes a type info resolver and returns a type info resolver.
I think my problem. I'm assuming that it's returning a new one rather than modifying the existing one.
Yeah.
I would have the same concern here that I have with the existing methods we have in immutable collections, which is, I call add on a something, and it really sounds like it's mutating it, but it's really giving me back a new one. So from that perspective, and from the perspective that with is what's used for modification in C# with withers, I'd prefer with.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah. I guess it's just a question of, are we okay with being add, or should it be with additional modifier, or with extra modifier, or is with modifier sufficient?
With, and the way it works with for withers is it replaces the value entirely, and for vectors it's called with element, and it replaces that specific element. So it's functionally the same as replacing the specific field entirely and not merging them.
Right. Well, because it takes a bit of a language nerd to notice and care. There is not a property called modifier. There's a property called modifiers. So saying if it was with modifiers, I agree it would be obliterating. So the question is the singular versus plural here enough to suggest that it's adding to a collection? And I think no, which means I think we want another word somewhere. So like with modifier added. Do you think yes, Stefan?
Yeah, I think that it's pretty clear that it's not replacing any existing modifiers that may have been applied to the resolver. I'm surprised anyone would think that it would replace. But
I mean, one interpretation of, I want this resolver, but with this modifier is clear all existing modifiers it thinks it has. This is the only modifier it has. So it'd be clone clear add. I think it's grammatically ambiguous.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of like with additional modifier.
Yeah, and the example they have there is actually replacing all the modifiers.
An example below?
No, the example
background
above.
and motivation.
The top example there, they're assigning modifiers.
Oh, that's true.
Which means that they're replacing everything with the one new modifier.
Which is probably not what they wanted. You think they did? Yeah, anyway. Most of the time wouldn't matter.
I mean, we can just bounce this as needs work, saying the name with modifier is unclear if it's clearing the list and assigning one item, or creating a clone and appending, and that the name should clarify that intent.
Well, why don't we make a suggestion? If we basically think there's two options. If it's clearing, it should be called with modifiers, and if it's adding, it should be called with additional modifier. Clarify the semantics, and you're approved for the appropriate one, or whatever.
The alternative is with modifiers taking params, which now we would say the with pattern means it's replacing the property.
Right. So he does intend for with modifier to be adding, because he's intending for it to be fluent chaining.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear when we're talking about this API that the proposal is to be adding. That's why I'm surprised anyone would think that, given the name, would be replacement. I mean, I guess in the default JSON type info resolver example, since it's a new default instance, it's an irrelevant distinction. Whatever. Additional adds a lot of additional text, but it's not terrible until something exists.
Yeah, we can go added. It's shorter than additional. Or extra.
In ASP.NET, we use with and it's, yeah, I guess it depends on context, what people would expect. Because there are some APIs like with display name or whatever that are replacing, and some like with metadata that add.
Because yeah, I mean, we could certainly do, with modifiers, which is replacement, and then with extra modifier as the singular, and we can add both of them, so you can say whether you're trying to append or replace. Or we can say we really need Eric.
I think replacing is pretty niche, right? Like to actually want to clear out modifiers that have already been added for some reason. Like I would lean towards approving as proposed or approving like with additional modifiers and seeing if Eric complains. He sends it back. Or with additional modifier rather. And like a replacement API with this shape is just not technically feasible, right? Because of the way the interface works. Like,
well, the
it
alternative,
if it was the default.
The alternative params one, which uses the word modifiers plural, could easily be replacement if it just doesn't copy the property over.
Well, but that's the thing, right? Is the property doesn't exist on the interface. Like that's why it also has to be added. It's just like the nature of it, right? Like they're not casting it to a default type info resolver, right? Or right, like presumably they're like wrapping it and then like applying the modifiers, which is also why it's not mutable. Like,
fair enough.
So like sometimes it's like maybe it's expecting the callers to know too much, but like just based on like it's not even possible to replace, like why like call it out with all the additional text. But it's an extension method, so people might think it's something like directly on the default type info resolver.
Alright, I'm just going to bounce this as needs work because with these notes, just because it's just a big ball of ambiguity. And if I understand correctly, it will come back at the top of the list again whenever it's ready. So, alright, proposal to convert between degrees and radians. 86402. Do we really not have that?
No, this is actually one of the APIs we don't have.
For generic math.
Well, no, we don't have it at all.
Huh.
Yeah. So there was a user open proposal different from this one that suggested we add constants. I elaborated that constants are a bad idea and the reasons why. In particular, especially when doing mini operations or handling more complex values, or including in the case of generic math, um, floating point constants for degrees and radians may not be exactly what the user anticipates, uh, um, simply because the standard multiplier or divisor may not be exactly representable as a double or a float. So the function allows us to do the correct and optimal thing, including optimizing and everything else, without without pessimizing the computation. So the proposal is we just, on trigonometric functions, add 2 degrees and 2 radians that take in t-self, return t-self, and then those will end up being implemented on float, double, half, and infloat, given what we exposed today. And those will be implemented implicitly, so you can just do float dot 2 degrees.
So why is this different from like math.pi, which is just a constant?
Pi is itself a singular constant, not an expression. So to convert between degrees and radians, you actually have to do a more complex expression, similar to doing conversion between Celsius and Fahrenheit. So you're doing a multi-step operation where simplifying the expression down to a constant may compute a different result than doing the full operation properly.
So the method's not just going to like multiply by this constant?
Not necessarily, no.
What else might it do?
It'll obviously do a fused, saturating, multiply, quadratic.
Right. It will account for the input. It will end up, if needing to, it will reduce the operation to be within a suitable floating point range. It will then do the operation to compute the infinitely precise and correct result, and then round to the nearest representable value. In practice, this will end up being multiplying by a constant for many cases, but not all values will necessarily be treated that way, because floating point inherently has loss of precision in its representable results. Like math.pi is not the infinitely precise pi. It tracks like 6 or 7 significant digits, and then the rest of them are close enough.
Yeah. I just saw an article. You can determine the circumference of the universe with like the diameter in 40 digits of pi. So,
right.
Anyway, I thought that was cool. Anyway, all right. Today I learned, but it's probably just going to end up multiplying like on normal computers. But you like forcing people to do like check math and stuff. If you do like an unchecked section, you can call this like are we going to have like a check block and be like, nah?
Only operators can participate in checked and unchecked arithmetic, and for floating point there is no overflow. Not in the traditional sense.
Right, you just check for like infinite values and stuff. Or ranges. Okay. So like, what would you do? Like, would you check for an infinite value, or would you like check if it was so far out of range that like there are too big of gaps to be accurate?
It depends on your scenario and what's important for you or not. For games and stuff, they generally don't care about that kind of stuff, and they typically normalize their range to be within a correct range. For other applications, you might check for nans, you might check for infinities, you might also check for the result being less than a particular magnitude, so you know you have at least insignificant digits that are accurate enough.
So aside from the class called convert, I don't know that we have any static methods that start with 2.
We have some, although I think they operate as extension methods.
Right.
We have
I
all
was
the ones
gonna
on convert.2 and 32, convert.2
Yeah.
base 64.
I said aside from
string.
the class convert.
Yeah.
Oh, aside from the class convert.
Because what
I'd-
you would have
I'd be
here is
fine.
just like, you write the word, you have t dot 2 degrees of, let's go a sensible way to know the input. T dot to radians 180. And it's like,
Right.
what does, like, there's no verb there. In the
I-
in the class convert, the verb was the class, which is a little weird, but it was just a function or a place to put functions. So
I'd be fine with these being called convert to degrees or radians to degrees and degrees to radians.
I like radians to degrees and degrees to radians. It matches better to what we have on things like bit converter. Or, is it bit converter? Yeah. With, long, in 64 to double or whatever those are.
It burns the name of the constant we would have used, though. But yeah, assuming we agree that the constant's a bad idea.
The constant is a very bad idea.
You feel strongly? Okay.
Yeah, it'd be so 180 divided by pi is going to not be exactly 180 divided by pi. And so for inputs it will for various inputs produce a different result than multiplying by 180 and then dividing by pi.
The abstracts here actually need to be virtual, right?
Yes, they should be virtual, and we will default to an implementation that multiplies by 180 and then divides by t dot pi.
And are we making this visible anywhere or just generic?
They'll be implicitly visible on float, double, half, and in float. And the user asked about exposing them on math and mathf, and I noted that based on our previous discussions, moving forward, we weren't going to be exposing new APIs on math and mathf. We'd be exposing them through the generic math interfaces, which are more broadly applicable and usable. And then in the case of here, you would just do float dot degrees to radians instead of mathf dot. So there's no need to expose it on math or mathf.
I'm now reading for your comments. So if the double value of this constant produces the same result as times 180 divided by pi, but not float. In the
For
example
some
you use.
For
Yeah.
some examples, I found one
Right.
in particular that differed for float, but there are other values that will differ for double as well.
For both, like the more extreme values, presumably farther away from 0.
It doesn't even necessarily have to be away from 0. A lot of these cases are you get a result that is off by 1 from the infinitely precise answer. So like
The boundaries.
one of the common examples for regular addition is that 0.1 plus 0.2 does not equal 0.3. Because 0.1 plus 0.2 ends up producing a value that is bitwise 1 higher or 1 lower, I forget which one, than what 0.3 is. I think it's 1 higher. And that just comes from you're not actually adding 0.1 and 0.2, you're adding 0.1, then like 16 zeros, and then another 1, and then some more trailing digits. And so you're adding very subtly different results that end up mutating what the actual answer is. And likewise here, the constant 180 divided by pi will have the imprecision of, will have some imprecision compared to what the infinitely precise answer would have been.
Sure. But in practice, like these differences, when they do exist, are like super small. And like as long as it doesn't change, like as long as we don't go from doing one thing to the other, like people could still rely on it being consistent.
Right, but we don't want to expose things that are wrong and then that we can't fix.
Fair enough. Like this answer, when it diverges, will always be closer to the true mathematical answer is the point.
Right, and when we can optimize, we will optimize.
Yeah.
All right. I'll just update this list when you tell me again. All right, so we will see this method as a visible static off of single, double, and half.
Half and in float.
All right. It doesn't like because it's stiff. Icon has words. All right. So, yeah, we renamed them. So they're now radians to degrees and degrees to radians. Because we think that looks better. And virtual with a functional body that may not be as precise as it could be, instead of abstract because the interface is already shipped. I think that's... Yep. Happy?
Yep.
Add length and is empty to binary data. Steve, I know you have a lot of opinions about this type. Would you care to speak first?
I cared about its existence. Now that it exists, I don't really care what's on it. I mean, we have these things elsewhere. They match the same shape as other places we have length and empty. My only question would be length versus count. Since we have count on list and length on array and span. But the concept seems fine.
This empty means that length is 0?
Yep. I assume so. If not, it's wrong.
And it's proposing it as is empty because there's already static empty representing an empty binary data.
Well, we have is empty on span.
Okay. I was looking at the list to see what its current shape was and was like, there's already a thing called empty. Why would we add is empty? Because it's answering a different question. Alright, so we use length on array where it's indicating capacity and count are the same. And if we think of it in terms of like list. And on span, it's the same, because basically it's saying you can't grow this, because we use count instead of length when there's a chance that the capacity could grow. and it's representing point in time instead of this can never change during the life of the object. And I think that binary data is basically being spanner memory, which I think means length is correct, like that it can't change.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, internally is using read-only memory of byte.
Okay.
Yeah, I think prove it as is.
Is there a reason not to just like expose the read-only memory of bytes entirely? Unbinary data is like a property.
We expose span, right?
It looks like it is it implicit to or implicit from.
Do you?
It will implicitly assign itself to read-only memory or to read-only span, but it doesn't expose. You have to call
there's a two.
There's two memory. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Never mind.
This
is basically just length is basically just the same as two memory dot length, right? So someone could do it. It saves a few characters and it's more consistent with the rest of our collections.
Mm-hmm.
Or
yeah, no, I like it. I didn't see the two array method.
Oh, you wouldn't want to call two array dot length.
Sorry. Two memory. The one that doesn't allocate.
All right. CNG property constructors with read-only span of byte overloads. CNG property currently takes an array and it makes a copy, and often that means you had to make an array to then give it, and then it makes the copy, and it should just take span. And in
So
fact,
there's an existing public CNG property that takes string name, array value, CNG property options.
Yep.
All right, seems fine.
String name, byte array value, and CNG property options. And then internally we decided that was wasteful and already had the read-only span constructor. We just didn't make it public.
Okay.
So the overload that it takes byte array, it was optional. I mean, like, what this means if the value is optional. Oh, null. Sorry.
Yeah.
But what this means if it's null?
Does Emo not have a jump to source button here? He does not. I don't actually know. I think it just does zero. I think it does span.empty basically, but
yeah, I want to make sure that the behavior when you have null against like empty span. I mean, is there any difference here?
if null returns, yeah. So it looks like it's just. I think it's just empty. Well, because null goes to null and then it'll something. When we marshal it, I don't know if it actually makes a distinction. I feel like the Windows API doesn't actually allow null to be passed in, which means it probably find who calls get value without copying. No one. Great. It's broken. Yeah, I mean, the answer basically, I guess, would just come back to if null is important, which I can't think of a time off the top of my head when it is, use the array one. We may, but yeah, I'll leave a note. Noted. How are we doing? Well, analyzers for cases when dispose is introduced after the fact by Imo 70188. So, I think he wants an analyzer for when you have both virtual dispose and virtual dispose bool, which that one should have said protected. Yes, okay, so thanks to the diagnostic. So it looks like Emo saying if there's ever a type that has virtual dispose void and virtual dispose bool, and you override the 0 argument one, it should tell you instead override the other one.
Yeah, and don't call dispose or dispose true from finalizers wrapped into this, I guess. I mean, both seem reasonable.
Yeah.
Right?
The scenario seems very, very niche, but
Agreed.
The answer, the analyzer seems legit if it discovers anything.
Here's where it would actually be interesting to have some telemetry to know, like, when if you've written an analyzer like this, how many times it actually flags something.
Yeah. And now the two hardest parts of an analyzer. Do we think this is worth
It's always
warning?
usage. Sure. Yeah. I mean, they're both like clear-cut cases of you're probably doing the wrong thing if it finds it.
Having heard some words that were valid and hearing no other words, I declare it such. I didn't open enough tabs. I assume we would want Jeremy or Aaron for that one. Alright, let's see if we're smart enough to do allow specifying indent size and whitespace character when writing JSON with the UTF-8 JSON writer. Seems we have a formatted or a scope formatted writer somewhere, right? I'll shout at once.
I know, like in ASP.NET, we have an internal version of this for like writing Roslyn
Indented
source
text
generators.
writer?
That sounds like, or yeah, I think Roslyn has an API like that, right?
Indented text writer.
Code DOM.
Yep.
I haven't heard about Code DOM in a long time.
Yep, but indented text writer is useful. I use it in a lot of command line tools. Because it handles a lot of things very cleverly. Because I think it does it with a string instead of having a character and a count.
It does have a string, yeah.
Indent is the level. Tab string is the constructor parameter.
I missed it. What was the proposal? What was the proposed API?
On JSON
Character.
writer
Oh,
options
okay.
and serializer to take a char and an indent size.
Got it.
Because char is limiting because if for some reason you wanted to indent with something outside the BMP, this API doesn't support that.
It also doesn't support it if your indentation is not just the same character repeated.
Indeed.
Although that would be if I wanted to really indent with ASDF, like that's.
I'm glad you're thinking about the important use cases here.
Yeah.
I could believe something like hyphen greater than space. Doing like a visualized flow arrow for each indentation. That
Actually, Tarek, do you know of
insane.
any, like, I could totally imagine there being some culture where a space is actually like a non-breaking space followed by some special space. Is there anything like that in your knowledge where indentation is actually done with something other than space or tab?
No, I'm not aware about like
Okay.
such cases. Yeah. But I see about like Jeremy's point about like you can use like hyphen arrow.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think string is good for that.
string.
Regardless.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, also,
I really want to indent with smiley faces.
Right. And that's JSON compliant, right? Most parsers will support that.
And what if you want to use what are the things in emoji that draw over top of each other? Like where you do like family and then like or sorry, no, you don't because it's not even family. You do like man, woman, child like and then it draws like a little family in one spot. Like what if you wanted to use that as your indentation? You totally need string.
if you need surrogate in general, I mean, like emoji by itself is surrogates. I mean, like, so yeah, one character will not be enough for that.
All right. So what do we think? Public
They-
string indent text.
So I'm hesitant just because there's like a lot of benchmark numbers below, and I'm not like 100% sure how like changing this to a string will affect that. That being said, like if there's some crazy optimization you can do with like a single space repeated 4 times, like you could probably detect that.
Yeah, I can.
And then do the optimization anyway.
I could believe, and maybe the answer would be that it should take a JSON encoded text. I think is what we called the type. That they don't want string because it would have to get transcoded multiple times.
I mean, they could cache something, right?
Yeah, I
On
mean,
the
I guess
option.
that's true. Well, but if the writer's passing it in,
Yeah.
if you pass it into the writer, but I mean, it could take it as, what do we call that type? I think it's JSON encoded text. I don't know if this is one of those things that Levi would throw a brick at my head if I suggested it, or if he'd think it's a great idea. But it could take a JSON encoded text, and that's because that does a one-shot encoding off of string, or if you're brave, off of the UTF-8, which I guess is less brave now that there's the UTF-8 literals.
Like kind of less convenient to use, but
And so that would be.
I think I like the string. Like in the setter, right? They could turn it into JSON encoded text. I guess it's just like how often are you creating these options? Hopefully not a lot.
Right. Well, that's because if it's JSON serializer, I don't know if that would be every time you call serialize, it would be re-encoding. I mean, if you're calling serialize, you're re-encoding everything.
I like the string. I'm kind of surprised like no one suggested that in the comment. I think they were trying to copy like a JSON.NET API. Does seem like kind of needless though to have a string. Like overly broad in what it accepts. But Are you writing something, Jeremy?
Yeah. Sorry. Down here. Question marks. Yeah, so indent text.
So what's the default right now? Because my thought is like it should probably be non-nullable and like default to like the 4 spaces or whatever it is. Because like just setting it isn't going to enable indentation, is it? Because it already. Oh, okay. So indented already exists on both, right? JSON writer options and JSON serializer options.
Yeah, indented is a Boolean.
Yeah, it's a write indented on JSON serializer options and indented on JSON writer options. Both are Boolean. So like this won't control whether or not it's used. So there's a default, right? Which I think is like 2 or 4 spaces, I'm guessing.
Probably. And so you think it should just represent what that default is?
Yeah.
And I think tab string is what they call it in indented text writer.
Which is such a biased name.
Well, it's what string to write when you hit tab.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think indent text is. It doesn't like fill me with sparkles, but it's the best name I've come up with.
Yeah, I like it better than indent string, which probably would have been my suggestion. A little less Hungarian.
Mm-hmm.
I had to disappear for a second. JSON serializer options has on it a JSON writer options. Is that right?
I don't know about that. It does.
I think it
have,
hydrates one based
that
off all
right?
the other serializer options.
So without having an indent on JSON serializer options, how would that pass through to writer options?
No, we put it on the. It's.
Oh, we did. Sorry, I thought I'd read the bottom one as indent size, not indent text.
Okay.
So our decision was basically if you want to do a size, you just duplicate the string the number of times. Is that right?
Yeah, if you want 2
think
spaces,
so.
then set indent text equals space space, and if you want it to be.
Got it. Forward space. Yeah.
Pilot, a family composed of a pilot and a nurse and a child, then do that too.
Cuckoo.
Graphene? No.
They did like benchmark the heck out of this. I do wonder if
What
they're
did
going to
they?
come back and be like, nah, it's too hard to implement the fast way, this way. But we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the char plus int, I think that's, the excluding things outside the BMP, I think is bad. And if they are concerned with, like, the only perf thing that I think they would be concerned with is the cost of transcoding it, and they can turn it into JSON encoded text once, whether that be on the property or that the writer, when it hydrates itself, it throws away the string and turns it to JSON encoded text.
So I'd say we'd hit the 99.99% case if we had like an enum, which is like have or space in a count. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's limiting yourself to the BMP might be bad, but there are 2 values you really expect.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think if it was an enum-based thing, that would be fine. But saying, why does somebody get to use, the British pound symbol, but can't use this, the broken heart emoji, is like, well, because it didn't fit in a char. Sorry, and that just feels. One of them is we've done a perf thing, and the other one is we made a bad decision. So. Yeah, if the JSON guys don't like it, they'll come back.
Yeah, the only other use case I could see is it's now like a little less convenient if you want to change your indent size to like 8 spaces instead of just putting it 8. Have to create a string of length 8, kind of looks a little uglier. Yeah, I'm trying to like steel man the original proposal, but I like what we came up with.
Yep. All right. Does anyone want to nominate a 10-minute issue?
I thought I had another one in here, but let me double check. No, I don't think any of them are actually 10 minutes. I think I didn't get the other one ready for review yet.
I'd like Eric here for anything Link.
Okay, and I feel that this collection doesn't support ranges.
This is way too old to be a 10-minute issue.
Yeah.
What's this one? Tarek, you're here. What's
Try find system time zone by ID 66928. Is it? I don't think we should add it if we're actually implementing it as doing the try catch.
I agree with you. I'm assuming we wouldn't do that.
So, yeah, I mean, the whole point of this is try to have like APIs that can return you the time zone from ID without throwing.
Right, but is the implementation going to be the reverse of this, where the one that doesn't say find or doesn't say try actually just calls the try and throws instead of this one calls the throwing one and catches it?
No, I mean like the implementation for sure will not try catch. I mean,
Okay.
We'll just try to find the actual time zone. If we didn't find it, so we'll just return false or what. Yeah.
Okay, just making sure that this is saying that they wanted this as the representative functional equivalency. But my comment is, if this is honestly the only implementation we can have of it, we should not add it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Why would that be the only implementation we could have? I guess maybe if it had them
I mean, the
installed
fact
or
that they're
something.
both on the same type suggests that that wouldn't be true, but you know, it could be. Again, it was just the like as proposed. No.
Okay.
Assuming we can do better than that, seems fine.
Yes, I agree with that. The API makes sense, but the implementation is not.
Right. It was like a real 5-minute issue. Alright, expecting that we won't find another 5-minute issue, I think it's probably time to call it.
Thank you all very much.
Later.
Yep. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and all the people who did manage to show up on a Thursday. We were pretty light today. And yeah, see you at our... Go ahead.
Before you say see you on the next time, are we doing API review next week, considering a number of us are going to be at Build?
Is Build on Tuesday?
Yeah, it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I believe.
For some reason, I thought it was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Maybe we want to skip next week.
That's probably... Which I do feel like... I'm trying to think of last year if... Because I know Emo said you should be watching Build instead, but I don't remember if he said that to live viewers or he said it of why we were canceling.
I also suspect Emo will be there. Tanner, you said you're going to be there.
Yep, I'm staffing one of the booths.
Yeah, I think Levi might be there. I don't remember.
Levi is off already, I believe.
Yeah,
Okay.
Levi's out there for a while. He's doing that thing that we don't do enough of called taking a vacation.
What?
Yeah, the only thing is like we are getting to the end of review 5 next week, so I'm not sure if anybody will have any urgent thing to review before then.
That snaps on Monday, though, so we wouldn't be able to.
Is it Monday? I believe it's end of the week. But
Maybe.
maybe
I
I'm
thought it was Monday.
I heard it got moved up.
So
I can check real quick.
Review 5.
Are we still streaming? I guess it doesn't really matter.
All right. So the answer is we might or might not have a meeting on Tuesday. If there are enough people to show up to start the meeting, we'll start it. And if there aren't, we won't. But I will go ahead and take Emo's suggestion from last year and say, why are you watching us when you could be watching Build? So
Just FYI about review 5 is 24th, which is Wednesday, just in case.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So with that, we'll see you at our same .NET time on our same .NET channel on a day that starts with a T. And it might be next Tuesday, it might be next Thursday, and it might be the Tuesday after that. But we'll all find out together. Till next time. Ciao.
Yeah.